At my sister's wedding, she had me sit on a folding chair right by the kitchen while even distant relatives were seated at lavish tables. Humiliated, I quietly walked out. 15 minutes later, the entire $250,000 event collapsed, and everyone finally realized exactly who paid the bills. My name is Audrey, 33 years old, and I am a senior forensic accountant in Manhattan. I spend my days tracking down corporate fraud and hidden assets. I am used to dealing with liars, but nothing prepared me for the elaborate deception my own family orchestrated. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members. The crystal chandeliers of the Newport mansion cast a golden glow over the grand ballroom. Towering floral arrangements of white roses sat at the center of 30 perfectly set tables. My younger sister Brittany had spared absolutely no expense for her big day. She was marrying Isaiah Dubois, a kind and successful African-American man from a prominent Atlanta family. The Dubois family occupied the best tables near the sweetheart stage, looking elegant and genuinely happy. I walked into the ballroom holding my silver clutch, scanning the beautifully calligraphed seating chart near the entrance. I found my name printed in flowing gold ink, Table 42. I navigated through the maze of heavy silk tablecloths and gilded chairs, smiling politely at guests I vaguely recognized. As I moved further away from the dance floor, the tables grew sparse. I kept walking until I reached the very back of the cavernous room where the grand ballroom met the busy catering staff. I stopped in my tracks. There was no table 42. Instead, shoved into a narrow, dimly lit corner next to the heavy wooden swinging doors of the kitchen, was a single cheap white plastic folding chair. It was the kind of chair you might find at a budget backyard barbecue, entirely out of place in this luxury estate. Slapped onto the plastic backrest was a piece of ripped masking tape with my name hastily scribbled in thick black marker. Audrey. They did not even use my last name, only just Audrey. Disbelief washed over me, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. I looked around the expansive room. I saw distant cousins sitting comfortably at table 12 sipping premium wine. I saw my mother's casual tennis club friends laughing over appetizers at table 8. Even the wedding photographer's assistant had a proper place setting. Every single person in this room had a designated seat of honor, except me. I carefully smoothed down my dark blue silk dress and sat on the hard plastic. It wobbled unevenly against the polished hardwood floor. I was so incredibly close to the kitchen that I could hear the head chef shouting urgent orders and the aggressive clatter of industrial dishwashers. The smell of heavy grease completely overpowered the scent of the expensive floral arrangements. I had barely settled into the uncomfortable seat when the swinging door suddenly burst open. A frantic waiter, holding a massive silver tray loaded with hot prime rib, rushed out completely unaware that someone was seated directly in his blind spot. The heavy wooden door slammed violently into the back of my folding chair. The impact jolted my spine, pushing my chair forward several inches across the floor with a loud scrape. My silver clutch slipped from my lap and hit the floor, spilling my keys and phone. The waiter gasped loudly, apologizing profusely as he struggled desperately to balance the heavy tray. Several guests at the nearest tables turned their heads, their eyes wide as they watched the humiliating spectacle unfold. I could feel their pity burning into the side of my face as I sat there in the shadows. I calmly told the terrified young waiter that it was not his fault at all. I bent down, gathered my scattered belongings, and sat back up with perfect posture. The sharp physical pain radiating between my shoulder blades was absolutely nothing compared to the intentional insult my family had just delivered. I am a highly successful professional. I manage complex multi-million-dollar corporate accounts and lead a team of brilliant financial investigators. Yet in the eyes of my parents and my sister, I was not even worth the rental cost of a standard banquet chair. They fully expected me to sit by the kitchen and quietly watch Brittany pretend to be a wealthy heiress. But as I sat there on that flimsy plastic chair, my analytical mind was quietly calculating the exact moment I would execute the financial ruin they had blindly brought upon themselves. The sharp clicking of my mother's designer heels cut through the ambient noise of the ballroom. I briefly thought she had seen the waiter hit me and was coming to check on my spine, which was currently throbbing with dull pain. I should have known better. 33 years of history should have taught me that my physical well-being always took a back seat to my sister's social events. Audrey, what on earth are you doing sitting so far out? You are practically blocking the catering staff, my mother hissed, keeping her voice low so the Dubois family would not hear. Move your chair closer to the wall. You are in the way. She did not ask if I was okay. She did not ask why her eldest daughter was seated on a piece of plastic next to a kitchen door. Her only concern was the seamless flow of the expensive prime rib to the VIP tables. I looked up at her perfectly powdered face. She was wearing a custom silver gown that she had boasted about for months, claiming she bought it with her hard-earned savings. I knew for a fact that the gown was charged to the exact same stolen account that paid for the orchids on the tables. My mother did not even wait for my response. Her eyes immediately darted across the massive ballroom, locking onto Brittany. My sister was standing near the sweetheart table, surrounded by her bridesmaids, laughing loudly. Even from 50 feet away, my mother noticed a slight imperfection. Brittany's custom cathedral-length veil was slightly off-center. Without looking at me, my mother began giving me instructions while her entire focus remained fixated on her golden child. You need to fix your face, Audrey, she muttered aggressively, smoothing out an invisible wrinkle on her own dress. You are sitting there, glaring at everyone and completely ruining the aesthetic of the background. The videographer is going to pan the room during the toasts, and we cannot have you looking miserable in the background of Brittany's luxury wedding film. Smile, or at least pretend you are happy for your sister for once in your life. Pretend I am happy. It was the exact same phrase she used when I was 18, and she forced me to hand over my college savings account to pay for Brittany's prestigious cheerleading camp. Back then, I was a naive teenager who thought sacrificing my own needs would finally earn my mother's love. Now I was a senior financial investigator who recognized a terrible return on investment. The irony of her demanding I protect the aesthetic of a wedding funded entirely by felony identity theft was almost too much to bear. I took a slow, deep breath to steady myself. I am sitting exactly where the seating chart directed me. Mom, I replied, my voice dangerously calm and even. If you wanted me out of the videographer's panning shots, you should have placed my name tag in the coat closet. My mother finally snapped her attention back to me, her eyes narrowing into angry slits. She leaned in close, bringing the overpowering scent of her expensive French perfume into my cramped space. Do not start your cynical attitude today, Audrey. We put you here because we know how socially awkward you get around successful people. Isaiah's family is high society. We cannot risk you embarrassing us with your depressing corporate talk or your cheap outfits. Just stay out of the way. I looked down at my dark blue silk dress. It was a tailored designer piece that cost more than my mother's entire monthly mortgage payment. But because it did not have a flashy, recognizable logo plastered across the chest, my mother deemed it cheap. To her, wealth was about screaming your status to the world. To me, wealth was about quiet power and impenetrable financial security. She reached out and roughly adjusted the collar of my dress, treating me like a stubborn prop that refused to stay in its designated spot. I gently but firmly swatted her hand away. The sudden rejection shocked her. In her world, I was supposed to take the scolding and shrink further into the shadows. Do not touch me, I said quietly. Her face flushed with indignation. You are incredibly ungrateful, she whispered sharply. Your sister worked tirelessly to create this perfect evening. The least you could do is show some gratitude and blend in. Now I have to go fix Brittany's veil before the first dance. Do not make me come back here. I watched her spin around and march back toward the center of the room, completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb she had just defended. She approached Brittany, fussing over the delicate lace. They smiled brightly as the wedding photographer snapped a quick, beautiful family photo. The wait was almost over. The wait was almost over. I sat back on the flimsy plastic chair, feeling the hard metal frame press against my shoulder blades. Across the ballroom, the photographer lowered his camera, and my mother let out a loud, theatrical sigh of satisfaction. She turned to walk back to her seat, but her path was intercepted. Mrs. Dubois, Isaiah's mother, was gliding across the polished floor. Mrs. Dubois was a vision of understated elegance. She wore a tailored emerald green evening gown that flowed gracefully with her every step. Her silver hair was styled perfectly, and she carried an aura of quiet, commanding authority. She came from a long line of prominent doctors and judges in Atlanta. Her family possessed generations of wealth and education, yet she never felt the need to flaunt it loudly. I respected her immensely. As she approached my mother, they exchanged warm pleasantries. But Mrs. Dubois had sharp eyes. Her gaze drifted past my mother's overly sprayed hair and landed directly on me, sitting in the shadows by the kitchen doors. A subtle frown creased her forehead. I could see the confusion in her posture. She gracefully linked her arm through my mother's and gently guided them both toward my dark corner. Cynthia. "Dear Mrs. Dubois," said her tone polite, but clearly questioning. "I was hoping to see Audrey closer to the family tables. Is there a problem with the seating arrangements over here? Why on earth is she seated next to the service entrance?" My mother froze for a fraction of a second. I watched her muscles tense. But years of social climbing and pathological lying kicked in instantly. Cynthia let out a bright artificial laugh that echoed over the soft jazz playing in the background. "Oh, do not mind Audrey," my mother said, waving her hand dismissively as if I were a quirky pet. "We practically begged her to sit up front with us, but you know how she is. She insisted on sitting here. She is just so cripplingly socially awkward, bless her heart. She gets overwhelmed by crowds and begged to be placed somewhere discreet. I told her it looked silly, but she simply refused to sit at a proper table." I sat there perfectly still, listening to the absolute fabrication falling from my mother's lips. She painted me as an incompetent recluse, completely disregarding the fact that I regularly presented financial audits to boardrooms filled with aggressive Wall Street executives. I thrive in high-pressure social situations. But to Mrs. Dubois, my mother was selling the image of a fragile, broken daughter to cover up her own cruelty. Mrs. Dubois looked at me, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and sharp intelligence. I could tell she did not entirely buy the story. She stepped closer, offering a warm, genuine smile. "Audrey, it is so wonderful to see you today," Mrs. Dubois said softly. "You look absolutely stunning in that blue silk. If it gets too loud back here with the kitchen staff, please know there is an empty seat next to my sister at table 4. You are always welcome with us." Her kindness was a stark contrast to my own family's toxicity. I returned her smile, ensuring my voice was steady, confident, and perfectly articulate. "Thank you, Mrs. Dubois," I replied smoothly. "You look magnificent as well. I appreciate the offer, but I assure you I am exactly where my family wants me to be right now. I am perfectly fine taking it all in from this perspective." Mrs. Dubois studied my face for a moment longer. She nodded slowly, squeezing my shoulder with a reassuring warmth before letting my mother guide her back toward the VIP section. My mother shot me one final venomous glare over her shoulder, a silent warning to stay in my place and keep my mouth shut. Once they were out of sight, my icy composure hardened into sheer resolve. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not let a single tear ruin my makeup. Instead, I reached into my silver clutch and pulled out my phone. I opened the camera application and turned on the flash. I stood up and positioned myself to capture the perfect angle. I snapped a high-resolution photograph of the cheap plastic folding chair. I made sure the ripped masking tape with my poorly scribbled name was perfectly in focus. In the background of the image, I captured the heavy metal swinging doors of the kitchen and a busboy pushing a cart of dirty dishes. Click. This single photograph was not just a memory of my humiliation. It was the first piece of undeniable evidence. I put my phone away and walked toward a half-empty table across the beautifully decorated grand room. I carried the plastic folding chair by its cold metal frame, navigating very carefully through the dense maze of elegantly dressed guests and rushing waiters. Table 26 was designated for distant business associates of my father's firm. There were 3 completely empty seats. The guests there were already engaged in deep conversation over their wine glasses, paying absolutely no attention to me. I reached the edge of the table and prepared to set my chair down. Before the plastic legs could even touch the thick carpet, I heard the heavy, aggressive rustle of silk rushing up behind me. A hand clamped down hard on my wrist. The manicured nails dug sharply into my skin. I turned my head and found myself looking directly into the furious face of the bride. Brittany had practically sprinted across the ballroom, abandoning her adoring bridesmaids to stop me. Her chest was heaving under the structured bodice of her gown. Up close, the facade of the blushing bride completely dissolved. Her eyes were wide with panic and rage. Her jaw was tightly clenched. "What do you think you are doing, Audrey?" She hissed, her voice a harsh, aggressive whisper designed to evade the ears of the Dubois family. I looked down at her hand gripping my wrist and then back up to her face. "I am moving my seat to a table with empty spaces," I replied calmly, keeping my voice entirely neutral. "It is too loud by the kitchen, and there is plenty of room right here." Brittany's grip tightened. Her perfectly painted lips curled into an ugly sneer. "You do not belong at this table," she spat. "These are important business contacts. You are not going to sit here in your depressing outfit and drag down the mood of my perfect night." I glanced at her custom cathedral lace veil and the elaborate diamond earrings sparkling in the ballroom light. It took every ounce of my professional self-control not to laugh out loud right then and there. She was standing there lecturing me about belonging and status while wearing hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen luxury. She was a hollow shell of entitlement, demanding respect she had never earned. "Let go of my arm, Brittany," I said, my tone dropping an octave, holding a quiet but absolute warning. She snatched her hand back immediately. She stepped directly into my personal space, using the massive skirt of her wedding dress to physically block me from the table. "I did not even want you here today," she sneered, her true feelings finally spilling out. "You are always so judgmental. You always act like you are smarter and better than everyone else, just because you live in Manhattan and work in a glass tower. I told Mom to leave you off the guest list completely, but she said it would look bad to Isaiah's family if my only sister did not show up. So she made me invite you." I stared at her, letting her words hang in the air between us. She was 28 years old, but she sounded exactly like the spoiled teenager who used to throw tantrums when my parents refused to buy her a new car. She had not grown up. She had simply found more expensive toys and more dangerous ways to acquire them. "You are a prop, Audrey," she continued, her voice dripping with venom. "You are here to make my family look normal and supportive. That is it. So you are going to pick up that ugly chair, walk back to your designated corner, and sit quietly until the cake is cut. Sit in your corner or get out. I do not care which one you choose, but you are not ruining my wedding." The sheer audacity of her demands echoed in my mind. She wanted me to sit in the shadows like a grateful peasant while she paraded around on my credit score. The golden child was used to getting her way through intimidation. My parents had always rewarded this exact behavior. They always forced me to yield to her demands to keep the peace. But tonight, there would be no peace. I looked past her shoulder and saw Isaiah standing near the sweetheart table watching us. He could not hear the conversation, but he looked concerned by Brittany's aggressive body language. I made direct eye contact with him, giving him a brief, reassuring smile, before turning my attention back to my furious sister. I slowly picked up the plastic chair by its frame, feeling the cold metal against my palm. "Okay, Brittany," I said softly, my voice devoid of any anger or hurt. "If that is truly what you want, I will go. I will not ruin the aesthetic of your flawless evening." I turned my back on her, leaving her standing there in her stolen gown. I carried the plastic chair back across the sprawling ballroom. The music had transitioned into an upbeat jazz number, and the dance floor was slowly filling with happy couples. I navigated through the crowd, my head held high, completely ignoring the sideways glances from my relatives. I reached my designated corner by the swinging kitchen doors and set the chair down with a quiet thud. I was fully prepared to sit down and wait for the perfect moment to execute my plan. But the universe had one final test for me to ensure my conscience was completely clear. My father Richard materialized from the shadows near the bar. He was wearing a custom-tailored tuxedo that looked slightly too tight around his waist. His face was flushed red, likely from the expensive scotch he had been drinking since the cocktail hour. He marched directly toward me, his jaw set in a hard line. I stood up straight, bracing myself for whatever lecture he was about to deliver. My father had always been a man who measured love in dollars and cents. He constantly complained about the cost of raising me while simultaneously funding Brittany's extravagant lifestyle without a second thought. "Audrey," he began, his voice thick with irritation, "your mother just told me you were trying to infiltrate the corporate tables. What is wrong with you? Do you have any idea how much pressure I am under tonight? This event is the pinnacle of our social standing and you are treating it like a joke." I looked at him calmly. "I was simply trying to find a seat where I would not be hit by the catering staff, Dad," I replied. "But do not worry. Brittany already put me in my place. I am staying right here." He let out a harsh scoff, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You always have an excuse, do you not? You always have to make everything about you. Do you know how much this wedding cost us?" He leaned in closer, lowering his voice to an aggressive hiss. $250,000, Audrey. We poured our entire life savings into making sure your sister had the wedding of her dreams. And you could not even be bothered to bring a gift." I stared at him, letting the sheer hypocrisy of his words wash over me. He genuinely believed he had paid for this event. He had no idea that the credit card holding the deposit, the flowers, the open bar, and the very tuxedo he was wearing was registered under my social security number. I remained silent, letting him dig his own grave. He reached into his tuxedo jacket pocket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and aggressively slid out a crisp $100 bill and a $50 bill. He practically shoved the money into my hand, but I refused to take it. The bills fluttered down, landing on the small cocktail table next to my plastic chair. "Pay for your plate, Audrey," he sneered, his eyes full of contempt. "That is the exact cost of the catering per person. Since you decided to show up empty-handed and complain about the seating arrangements, the least you can do is cover your own meal. Do not be a freeloader today of all days. Show some respect for the sacrifices this family has made for you." That was the breaking point, the ultimate catalyst, the final confirmation I needed. I had spent 2 months agonizing over whether I should expose my sister. I had wondered if destroying her wedding would make me the villain. I had hoped that maybe my parents would show me a shred of basic decency today. But looking at the $150 sitting on the table, I felt a profound sense of clarity. They did not love me. They did not respect me. To them, I was just a financial burden, a social embarrassment, and a convenient punching bag. I did not yell. I did not throw my drink in his face. I simply smiled. It was a genuine cold smile that reached my eyes. It unnerved him. He took a half step back, his brow furrowing in confusion. "You are absolutely right, Richard," I said, my voice soft but razor sharp. I intentionally used his first name, stripping away the title of father he had just forfeited. "I should not be a freeloader. You paid exactly what you owe." I picked up my clutch. I left the money sitting on the table. Without another word, I turned and walked straight out the heavy side doors of the ballroom, stepping into the cool night air. The wait was over. The cool Rhode Island night air felt like an absolute blessing against my heated skin. The heavy thumping of the wedding band faded into a dull rhythm as I walked across the manicured gravel path toward the sprawling parking lot. Valet attendants stood by the grand entrance, but I bypassed them entirely. I walked past rows of rented luxury vehicles, shiny sedans and SUVs leased just for the weekend, to maintain the illusion of wealth for the Dubois family. I kept walking until I reached the secluded back section of the lot where I had parked. I pressed the button on my key fob. The sleek headlights of my charcoal gray Porsche Panamera flashed twice in the darkness. I slid into the driver's seat. The rich scent of premium leather enveloped me instantly. I closed the heavy door, shutting out the rest of the world completely. The cabin of my car was practically soundproof. I leaned my head against the steering wheel for just a fraction of a second, letting the adrenaline of the confrontation settle in my chest. Then I reached into the passenger footwell and lifted my heavy leather briefcase onto my lap. I unzipped the bag and pulled out my encrypted work laptop. It was a high-performance machine issued by my firm, equipped with military-grade security software. As the screen illuminated my face in the dark cabin, I typed in my complex alphanumeric password. My family had spent the last decade assuming I was a struggling corporate drone barely scraping by in an overpriced city. They thought my quiet demeanor meant I was weak and unsuccessful. They had no idea what a senior forensic accountant actually does. I do not just balance ledgers or file taxes for small businesses, I hunt financial criminals for a living. I track down offshore accounts, expose shell companies, and dismantle massive corporate fraud syndicates across Manhattan. I spend my days unraveling the lies of ruthless executives who think they are untouchable. I have testified in federal court cases where millions of dollars were at stake. My entire career is built on finding the truth hidden beneath layers of deceit and manipulation. Dealing with a spoiled 28-year-old bride was practically child's play compared to my daily workload. The desktop loaded smoothly. I bypassed my active corporate client files and clicked on a heavily encrypted personal folder. Hidden deep within my hard drive, I entered a second administrative password. The folder opened, revealing a meticulously organized digital dossier. The title of the master file was written in bold white letters across the screen. Brittany Wedding Fraud. I clicked on the first subfolder labeled Financial Statements. Rows of pristine documents populated the screen, showing every stolen cent. Next to it was a folder titled Geo-Tracking. Beside that was a folder containing high-resolution security camera stills. I had spent the last 2 months applying my aggressive professional skill set to my own blood relatives. Every single digital footprint my sister had left behind was currently glowing brightly on my screen. It was almost pathetic how sloppy she had been. Professional criminals usually try to cover their tracks using complex wire transfers or offshore accounts. Brittany had committed her crimes from her own apartment using standard residential internet. She left a trail of digital evidence so wide and obvious that an entry-level intern could have easily built the entire case. But she felt completely safe because she thought I was incredibly stupid. She thought I was the exact same quiet girl who used to let her take whatever she wanted when we were children growing up. She assumed that family loyalty would force me to stay silent forever. She calculated that my fear of our parents' disapproval would override my sense of justice. She calculated incorrectly. The evidence sitting in my lap was bulletproof. It was organized perfectly by date time and the exact IP address used to commit the fraud. I looked through the windshield at the distant glowing mansion. Inside that massive building, my father was likely still fuming over the $150 he threw at me. My mother was probably fixing Brittany's veil again, ensuring the golden child looked absolutely perfect for the expensive videographers. They were completely blinded by their own arrogance and entitlement. They genuinely believed they had won the evening. They thought my silent departure was a sign of total defeat. They assumed I had run away, humiliated because I could not afford to pay for my own dinner plate. The reality was vastly different. I was sitting in a custom sports car that cost more than their entire mortgage, holding enough undeniable federal evidence to send the beautiful bride to a federal penitentiary for a very long time. Penitentiary for a very long time. I reached out and clicked on the primary PDF file, named Initial Approval. The screen instantly populated with the digitized image of an exclusive Black American Express invitation. 3 months ago, this heavy matte black envelope was mistakenly delivered to my parents' suburban home. I had updated my mailing address when I moved to my new luxury condo in the city, but a few legacy financial mailers still occasionally slipped through the cracks. My mother usually tossed my mail in a shoebox in the garage, but Brittany had found this one. The Dubois family came from generations of prominent doctors and established wealth. Isaiah was incredibly grounded and never cared about status, but Brittany was deeply intimidated by his family tree. She desperately wanted to present herself as an equal. She wanted a royal wedding to prove she belonged in their elite social circle. The problem was that her part-time job as a social media consultant barely covered her designer shoe addiction. My parents were comfortably middle class, but they certainly did not have the $250,000 required to rent a Newport castle. So my sister devised a ruthless solution. She knew my social security number. Our parents kept all our childhood documents in an unlocked metal filing cabinet in their home office. Brittany simply walked in, took a photo of my birth certificate and my social security card, and went back to her apartment to begin her operation. The digital logs on my screen showed exactly how she executed the fraud. She used her personal laptop to access the specialized application link provided in the mailer. She inputted my personal information, my pristine credit score, and my substantial annual income, which she guessed accurately based on my career title. Then she forged my digital signature. She bypassed the security verification steps by routing the confirmation phone calls to a burner cell phone she purchased using cash at a local convenience store. The financial institution saw a flawless application from a high-earning corporate executive with an impeccable credit history. They approved the massive $250,000 credit line almost instantly. The physical card was shipped directly to Brittany's apartment building. What fascinated me most as a forensic accountant was how she managed to deceive our parents. My father had stood in the ballroom just 10 minutes ago, proudly claiming he had poured his entire life savings into this event. The financial statements on my laptop revealed the sickening truth. Brittany had indeed taken $50,000 from my parents' retirement accounts. She told them that was the total cost of the wedding and promised to handle all the vendor payments herself. But she never gave a single dime of our parents' hard-earned savings to the wedding planners. Instead, she transferred their $50,000 into a private offshore investment account under her own name to fund her lavish 3-week honeymoon in the Maldives and her future shopping sprees. To pay for the actual wedding, she used the stolen credit card registered under my identity. She charged every single extravagant detail to my name. I scrolled down the itemized billing statement. $25,000 for the imported white roses alone, $15,000 for her custom cathedral lace gown, $8,000 for the premium open bar, $12,000 for the string quartet and the jazz band. Even the custom-tailored tuxedo my father proudly wore tonight was charged to my stolen account. She had built her entire fairy tale on a foundation of massive financial felonies and absolute betrayal. She thought she was a criminal mastermind. She genuinely believed she had successfully outsmarted the entire banking system. Her wealthy in-laws, our gullible parents, and her socially awkward sister. But she made one catastrophic miscalculation. The moment she activated that credit line, the bank automatically linked the new account to my comprehensive digital financial profile. Because I maintain strict fraud protection algorithms on all my assets, I received a secure alert on my work phone within 48 hours of the card's activation. I could have stopped it right then. I could have frozen the account before she even bought the first sample dress. I could have called the police and had her arrested 3 months ago in her tiny apartment. But my professional training taught me that premature confrontation allows the guilty party to construct plausible deniability. If I confronted her early, she would have cried to our parents, claimed it was a complete misunderstanding, and somehow manipulated the situation to make me look like the jealous villain I needed, airtight, undeniable proof of her malicious intent, and I wanted to see exactly how far she would actually dare to go. For exactly 60 long days, I sat on this explosive secret. 60 days of watching my mother post endless updates on social media about the lavish preparations. 60 days of listening to my father brag to his golf buddies about how he was sparing no expense for his little girl's perfect day. 60 days of Brittany, ignoring my text messages unless she needed to ask what color dress I was wearing, so I would not clash with her carefully curated bridesmaids. It was a surreal psychological experiment. I was funding the entire grand illusion, but I was treated like an unwanted interloper who was barely tolerated. My colleagues at the firm thought I was crazy when I casually mentioned what I was monitoring on my personal time. They urged me to file the police report immediately. They warned me about the immense liability of letting $250,000 in fraudulent charges accrue. But they did not understand the complex, toxic dynamics of my family. I did not just want to stop the fraud. I needed absolute permanent closure to finally move on with my own life, free from their constant manipulation. I needed to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was making the right decision by destroying her life. I told myself that today would be their final test. If I had walked into that magnificent ballroom and found a real seat waiting for me, if my mother had smiled at me with genuine warmth instead of aggressively scolding me for ruining the visual aesthetic of the room, if my father had simply hugged me instead of arrogantly demanding payment for a plate of food I had not even touched, if Brittany had shown even a tiny fraction of sisterly affection instead of treating me like a peasant trespassing in her rented castle, if they had shown me just one single ounce of basic human dignity, I might have handled this entirely differently. I might have quietly paid off the massive debt myself, absorbed the financial blow, and simply walked away from them forever without pressing federal charges. I was desperately looking for a single reason to show them mercy, to pretend we were a real family, just for one night. But the universe has a funny way of giving you exactly the agonizing clarity you ask for. They did not give me a reason to show mercy. They gave me a cheap, wobbling plastic folding chair shoved into a dark corner next to the heavy swinging doors of a greasy kitchen. They gave me a ripped piece of sticky masking tape instead of a beautifully calligraphed name card, like everyone else. They gave me a furious lecture about my wardrobe and a $150 bill aggressively dropped onto a cocktail table. That was their definitive answer, delivered without a single ounce of hesitation or remorse. That was the total sum of my worth in their greedy eyes. They wanted the luxurious benefits of my hard-earned success, without ever acknowledging my humanity or my presence. As I sat in the quiet, soundproof sanctuary of my sports car, I felt the last remaining threads of familial obligation completely snap. I was no longer the disappointing older daughter seeking their elusive approval. I was a highly trained senior financial investigator, looking at a cut-and-dry case of felony wire fraud and identity theft. The heavy psychological weight I had been carrying around for 2 long months instantly vanished into the cool night air. It was entirely replaced by a cold, calculating precision that I usually reserved for hostile corporate takeovers. I closed the primary evidence folder on my desktop and opened my secure encrypted internet browser. The trap was officially sprung, and there was absolutely no going back now. I took a slow sip of my bottled water, letting the cool liquid soothe my dry throat, while I mentally prepared for the imminent explosion. The digital dashboard clock glowed brightly in the dark cabin, indicating it was exactly 8:30 in the evening. Inside the massive venue, the fresh salads were likely being cleared away, and the expensive main courses were about to be served to the guests. The premium open bar would be in full swing, serving top-shelf cocktails charged directly to a credit card that was about to be completely obliterated. I positioned my fingers perfectly over the glowing laptop keyboard. It was finally time to pull the plug on Brittany's $250,000 fairy tale fantasy and force them all to face reality. I opened the direct digital portal to the elite fraud division of my credit card issuer and took one final deep, steadying breath before typing. The twisted little family game was finally over. Instead of using the web portal to finish the process, I picked up my phone. I dialed the dedicated priority hotline for American Express Elite Services. The system bypassed the waiting queue. The phone rang only twice before a live agent picked up. "Good evening, you have reached the Executive Client Division. My name is David. I projected absolute corporate authority. Hello, David. My name is Audrey. I need to report a severe case of identity theft and execute an immediate hard freeze on an unauthorized credit line recently opened in my name. I provided my secure PIN and account number. I heard rapid typing on his end. Ms. Audrey, I see the account right here. David said, his tone instantly shifting to high alert. This black tier line has a balance of $250,000. It is currently being actively charged at a private event venue in Rhode Island. Are you confirming these charges are unauthorized? Yes, I am confirming, I replied sharply. My sister forged my digital signatures and bypassed your security protocols using a burner phone. I have compiled the complete digital dossier of her fraudulent activities, including IP addresses and bank security camera footage, which I will be submitting directly to your Federal Fraud Division tomorrow morning. For now, I need you to freeze the account immediately, shut down all payment processing capabilities, and flag the entire outstanding balance as an active criminal fraud investigation. Understood, David said, his voice tight with professional urgency. I am permanently locking the card right now. Any pending authorizations will be aggressively rejected by our system. The physical card is now officially dead and entirely useless. You will absolutely not be held liable for these fraudulent charges, Ms. Audrey. Our internal investigation team will reach out to you first thing Monday morning to collect your evidence files. I thanked David for his rapid assistance and ended the call. The very first domino had just been forcefully pushed over. The $250,000 lifeline keeping my sister's lavish fantasy afloat was permanently severed. But I was not quite finished with my work. The credit card company would automatically decline any new charges, but the venue management might not actually realize it until the end of the night, when they attempted to process the final catering invoice. I wanted the explosion to happen right now, while the wealthy guests were still eating their stolen prime rib, and my mother was still proudly adjusting that stolen custom lace veil. I opened my internet browser and searched for the direct contact number for the Newport Mansion's corporate management office. I dialed the local Rhode Island area code. A receptionist answered quickly over the loud ambient noise of the busy catering kitchens. Newport Castle Events Management. How can I help you? I need to speak to the general manager on duty immediately, I said, my voice demanding absolute compliance. This is an extremely urgent financial matter regarding the Dubois wedding currently taking place in your grand ballroom. The receptionist hesitated for a second before transferring my call. A deep voice answered a moment later. This is Gregory, the general manager. How can I help you tonight? Gregory. My name is Audrey, I said clearly. I am the legal name on the American Express card currently being used to underwrite the entire Dubois wedding tonight. Gregory sounded relieved. Ah, yes, Ms. Audrey. We were just about to run the final authorization for the premium open bar and the overtime staff charges. Is there an issue with the bank? Yes, Gregory, there is a massive issue, I replied, my tone turning razor sharp. That credit card was opened using a stolen identity. My sister committed felony wire fraud to secure that massive credit line. I just got off the phone with the Elite Fraud Division, and they have successfully executed a hard lock on the account. If you attempt to run that card tonight, it will be instantly declined as active criminal fraud. There was a stunned, terrifying silence on the other end of the line. The general manager of a luxury estate suddenly realized he was currently hosting a $250,000 party with absolutely no valid payment method on file. Excuse me, Gregory stammered, his professional composure completely shattering. Are you telling me that the wedding happening right now in my ballroom is entirely unfunded? That is exactly what I am telling you, Gregory, I said smoothly, looking through the windshield at the glowing mansion. I highly suggest you go out there and ask the bride for a different form of payment immediately, because the bank is not giving you another dime. Good luck. I ended the call and tossed my phone onto the leather passenger seat. The screen of my laptop was still glowing brightly in the dark cabin of my car. I moved my hands back over the keyboard and opened a new secure browsing window. I typed in the web address for the Internet Crime Complaint Center. It is the official federal portal operated by the Federal Bureau of Investigation used specifically to track and prosecute high-level cybercrimes and wire fraud. As a forensic accountant, I am extremely familiar with this database. Usually I am uploading massive corporate ledgers outlining millions of dollars embezzled by greedy executives. Tonight I was uploading the details of my own sister. The portal loaded, displaying a stark government warning about the severe penalties for filing false federal reports. I did not hesitate for a single second. I clicked on the button to start a new criminal complaint. The first section required the victim's information, so I inputted my own legal name and contact details. The second section required the subject's information. I carefully typed in Brittany's full legal name, her current residential address, and her personal cell phone number. Then came the evidence upload section, which was my professional specialty. I attached the PDF files containing the forged credit card applications. I uploaded the network logs, clearly showing that the digital signatures were executed directly from the IP address registered to Brittany's apartment. She had not even bothered to use a basic virtual private network to hide her location. Next, I attached the high-resolution security camera stills. I had hired a licensed private investigator to subpoena the bank footage legally. The private investigator had delivered beautifully clear images. I looked at the photos on my screen before dragging them into the federal portal. They showed Brittany standing at a bank teller window holding the counterfeit documents. She was holding a luxury handbag bought with my stolen funds. Her face was perfectly captured by the high-definition security cameras. There was no possible way she could claim someone else had stolen my identity. The physical and digital evidence locked her perfectly into the crime. I attached the comprehensive spreadsheet I had built, which cross-referenced every single fraudulent transaction with her exact geographical location at the time of purchase. The file detailed all 250,000 stolen dollars. I scrolled down to the final section of the federal form. It asked for a brief narrative description of the criminal activity. I typed a concise summary outlining the identity theft and the ongoing event funded by stolen money. I read through the entire complaint one last time to ensure absolute accuracy. My professional reputation demanded perfection even when destroying my own family. Everything was flawless. I moved my cursor over the bright blue submit button at the bottom of the screen. For a fraction of a heartbeat, I thought about my parents. I thought about the tears and the screaming that would inevitably follow. Then I remembered the wobbling plastic folding chair shoved against the kitchen doors and the $150 my father threw at me. I pressed down on the trackpad. Click. The screen refreshed, displaying a confirmation page with an official federal case number. The trap was fully closed. The digital files were currently routing directly to federal agents who would open the case file first thing Monday morning. I closed the laptop, shutting down the glowing screen and plunging the cabin of my car back into comfortable darkness. I placed the heavy machine back into my leather briefcase. I reached down and pulled the lever on the side of my seat. The expensive leather seat smoothly reclined backward, giving me a perfect view of the sprawling Newport mansion through the panoramic sunroof. I reached into the center console and pulled out a bottle of cold, sparkling water. I twisted the cap off, hearing the sharp hiss of carbonation. I took a long, slow sip, letting the cold liquid wash down my throat. I felt incredibly relaxed. The tension in my shoulders was completely gone. I rested my head back against the soft headrest and watched the grand ballroom windows from a distance. The warm golden light from the crystal chandeliers spilled out onto the manicured lawns. I saw the guests dancing and laughing, completely unaware that their financial ground had just evaporated. The general manager was likely sprinting down the hallways right now, desperately trying to figure out how to handle the massive crisis. The shockwave was already traveling through the building. It would start at the management office, then hit the catering staff, then crash directly into the VIP tables. I took another long, slow sip of water and waited for the music to stop. Inside the grand ballroom of the Newport mansion, the atmosphere was absolutely intoxicating. 300 elegantly dressed guests were completely oblivious to the digital execution that had just taken place out in the parking lot. The energy in the room was at its absolute peak. Waiters in white uniforms glided between tables, carrying silver trays loaded with premium imported champagne. The scent of white roses filled the air, mingling with the aroma of roasted prime rib being served to the VIP tables. At the center of it all, Brittany was holding court. She stood near the edge of the polished wooden dance floor, radiating an aura of total triumph. Her custom cathedral lace veil cascaded perfectly behind her as she laughed loudly at a joke made by one of Isaiah's groomsmen. In her mind, she had already won. She had successfully bullied her older sister into leaving, thereby removing the only visual reminder of her actual middle-class reality. She believed her dark secret was perfectly safe. She took a delicate sip of her expensive champagne, genuinely believing she had successfully bought her way into high society permanently. Nearby, my parents were actively playing their chosen roles. Richard stood near the premium open bar, holding a glass of top-shelf scotch that he confidently believed he had paid for. He was engaged in an animated conversation with Isaiah's uncle, loudly discussing the stock market and pretending to possess a vast portfolio of diversified assets. Cynthia was seated next to Mrs. Dubois, enthusiastically detailing the imaginary historical significance of Brittany's wedding dress design. My mother was completely in her element, basking in the reflected glow of the Dubois family's established wealth. They were all performing their parts flawlessly in a play funded entirely by stolen money. Then the beautiful illusion began to fracture. It did not happen with a massive explosion or a dramatic scream. It started with a subtle but deeply unsettling shift in the environment. On the raised mahogany stage, the live string quartet was in the middle of a sweeping romantic melody. Suddenly, the lead violinist lowered his bow, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. A man in a dark suit, the events coordinator, had just walked briskly onto the stage and whispered frantically into the musician's ear. One by one, the cellist and the viola player stopped playing. The beautiful music simply bled out, leaving a jarring hollow silence in its wake. Before the guests could fully process the sudden lack of music, the visual atmosphere violently shifted. The massive crystal chandeliers suspended from the vaulted ceiling abruptly dimmed by 50%. The warm, romantic golden glow was instantly replaced by the stark, flat emergency lighting of the perimeter wall sconces. The ballroom suddenly looked less like a fairy tale castle and much more like a massive, empty warehouse. The carefully curated aesthetic that my mother had obsessed over was entirely destroyed in a matter of seconds. A collective wave of confusion washed over the 300 guests. Low murmurs began to ripple across the beautifully decorated tables. People lowered their champagne flutes and looked around nervously, checking their expensive watches. They whispered to each other, wondering if it was a planned theatrical moment for the bride's first dance, or a sudden power failure. But the most alarming shift happened at the back of the room near the exact corner where they had placed my plastic folding chair. The heavy wooden swinging doors of the catering kitchen, which had been in constant chaotic motion all evening, suddenly slammed shut. A loud, heavy metallic click echoed from the doors, indicating the deadbolts had been thrown from the inside. The steady flow of prime rib and roasted vegetables completely stopped. The waiters who were currently on the ballroom floor suddenly stopped serving. They looked at each other in obvious confusion as their hidden earpieces crackled with urgent instructions from management. Without a single word of explanation to the hungry guests, the entire waitstaff turned around, leaving half-empty trays on the tables, and marched out the side exits of the ballroom. Brittany noticed the waiters leaving, and her triumphant smile instantly vanished. Her perfectly powdered face contorted into a mask of pure aristocratic annoyance. She firmly believed this was simply a technical glitch or an incompetent vendor ruining her flawless timeline. She aggressively handed her champagne glass to a bridesmaid and began marching across the dance floor, her heavy silk gown swishing angrily around her legs. She was preparing to scream at the nearest staff member and demand that the lights be turned back on immediately. She had absolutely no idea that the darkness falling over her wedding was not a broken fuse, but the heavy, inescapable shadow of federal law. Brittany stomped her designer heels against the hardwood of the dance floor, her face twisted into a mask of irritation. She headed directly toward the sound mixing board, intending to scream at the technician for ruining her curated timeline. But before she reached the edge of the stage, a heavy side door near the locked kitchen flew open. Gregory, the general manager of the mansion, marched into the dimly lit ballroom. His face was entirely flushed with anger, and his jaw was set with absolute rigid determination. He was flanked by two massive men wearing dark suits and security earpieces. The sudden aggressive appearance of the venue management team caused anxiety to spread through the nearest tables. "Richard," my father immediately set down his glass of scotch and stepped away from the bar. He assumed this was some minor administrative error he could resolve with a firm handshake. He began walking toward Gregory, prepared to play the role of the wealthy patriarch protecting his daughter's evening. But Gregory completely ignored my father. He bypassed the angry bride and walked straight up the short steps onto the mahogany stage. He stepped in front of the confused string quartet and grabbed the microphone directly from the silver stand. A sharp, piercing squeal of audio feedback echoed through the cavernous room, forcing several guests to cover their ears. The agonizing sound effectively silenced the remaining murmurs in the crowd. 300 pairs of eyes instantly locked onto the furious general manager. Gregory took a deep breath, his voice booming through the massive speakers and echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "Ladies and gentlemen, the credit card underwriting this $250,000 event has just been frozen for felony identity theft. The bar and the kitchen are closed until the balance is paid in full in cash immediately." The silence that followed his announcement was terrifying. It was a suffocating vacuum of sound as 300 wealthy individuals collectively stopped breathing. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. Then a chaotic wave of panicked gasps and furious whispers erupted across the sea of tables. Guests looked at each other in sheer horror, setting down their expensive champagne flutes, as if the crystal had suddenly caught fire. The word fraud began to hiss through the crowd, spreading rapidly. At table 1, Mrs. Dubois slowly lowered her hands to her lap, her posture becoming incredibly rigid. The warm, elegant smile she had worn all evening completely vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. The distinguished members of the Dubois family exchanged rapid, alarmed glances, their pristine social reputations suddenly threatened by a massive federal crime. Brittany stood frozen at the edge of the dance floor. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and sickly against the stark white of her custom lace gown. Her immediate instinct was to perform to lie her way out of the corner she had painted herself into. She aggressively climbed the stairs to the stage, pushing past a security guard, and lunged for the microphone. "This is a complete misunderstanding!" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking with pure panic. She forced a hysterical laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. "It is just a ridiculous bank error. My father is paying for absolutely everything. Turn the lights back on right now and bring out the main courses. You are ruining my wedding." Gregory stepped back, holding the microphone firmly away from her. His eyes were cold and completely unsympathetic. "This is not a bank error, Mom," he stated, his voice amplified for every single guest to hear clearly. "I just got off the phone directly with the primary cardholder whose social security number and digital signature were illegally used to secure this property. She instructed me to halt all services because she is currently filing federal charges." My father reached the edge of the stage, his face purple with indignant rage. He pointed a trembling finger upward. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" Richard bellowed over the whispering crowd. "I am Richard and I funded this entire event. If there is a billing problem, you speak to me in private. You do not humiliate my family." Gregory looked down at my father with pure disdain. He pulled a master authorization folio from his jacket and unfolded it, clearly displaying the bank letterhead. "You did not fund anything," Sir Gregory said, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "This entire event was charged to a card registered exclusively to a woman named Audrey, and she just informed me that she did not authorize a single penny of it." The brutal truth finally hit the silent room like a massive physical blow, completely exposing their devastating financial theft to every single person currently present inside the hall. The brutal truth finally hit the silent room like a massive physical blow, completely exposing their devastating financial theft to every single person currently present inside the hall. For a fleeting second, the ballroom felt like a pressurized cabin that had just lost a window. Then absolute chaos erupted. The polite whispers instantly morphed into loud, frantic conversations. Guests scraped their chairs backward, standing up in shock. Some immediately reached for their phones to text people who were not even at the wedding, eager to spread the spectacular scandal of the decade. The veneer of high society elegance completely shattered, leaving behind a room full of outraged individuals who realized they were attending an event funded by a federal crime. Richard stared at the bank authorization folio in Gregory's hand as if it were a venomous snake. The indignant purple rage that had colored his face only moments ago instantly drained away, leaving him looking sickly and ash-gray. His jaw went slack. He turned his head slowly, looking at his wife for some sort of salvation. But Cynthia was completely paralyzed. She stumbled backward, bumping hard against a beautifully decorated table and knocking over a crystal water goblet. The ice water spilled across the white silk tablecloth, soaking into the fabric like a dark stain. She could feel the burning, judgmental stares of her tennis club friends piercing right through her carefully constructed facade. Her entire social climbing existence was disintegrating in real time before her very eyes. Mrs. Dubois did not panic. She simply stood up from table one, her movements deliberately slow and terrifyingly composed. She did not yell or cause a scene. She simply crossed her arms and stared directly at my parents with a look of absolute disgust. That silent judgment from the matriarch of the Dubois family was worse than any screaming match. It was the definitive end of any relationship between the two families. Isaiah stood beside his mother, his brow furrowed in deep confusion, but his sharp mind was already connecting the terrifying dots. Brittany could not accept the reality of the situation. Her narcissistic brain simply refused to process the fact that she had been caught and utterly destroyed. She believed she could still spin the narrative. She physically shoved past her paralyzed father and aggressively snatched the microphone back from Gregory before the security guards could intervene. She gripped the metal microphone with both hands, her knuckles turning white. She let out a shrill, forced laugh that sounded exactly like breaking glass, echoing painfully through the massive speakers. "Please, everyone, just calm down," Brittany yelled, her voice trembling with barely suppressed hysteria. "This is a massive misunderstanding. It is just a ridiculous bank error mixed with a very cruel prank. My older sister Audrey is notoriously jealous of me. She always has been. She works a depressing corporate job and she has absolutely no money of her own. She is just bitter that I am marrying into such a wonderful family while she is completely alone. She must have called the bank and made up a horrible lie to freeze my parents' account just to ruin my perfect day." The crowd stared at her in stunned silence. Even the people who did not know me could hear the desperate, unhinged lying in her voice. But Brittany was fully committed to the delusion. She raised her left arm, the heavy lace sleeve falling back to reveal her diamond bracelet. She pointed her perfectly manicured finger directly across the vast ballroom, aiming straight for the dimly lit corner by the swinging kitchen doors. She fully expected me to be sitting there, cowering in the shadows, ready to be bullied into submission. "Audrey, stop hiding like a coward!" Brittany screamed into the microphone, her voice cracking with pure venom. "Stand up right now and tell the venue manager that you made a mistake. Tell them to turn the lights back on and process the payment. Fix this embarrassing mess right now, or I swear to God I will never speak to you again." 300 pairs of wealthy, judgmental eyes immediately followed her pointing finger. The collective gaze of the entire ballroom shifted away from the stage and zeroed in on the dark corner next to the kitchen. They expected to see a jealous, bitter older sister stepping out of the shadows to apologize for ruining the wedding. Instead, they saw absolutely nothing. The space was completely devoid of human life. There was only a cheap white plastic folding chair resting unevenly against the hardwood floor. Next to the chair sat a small cocktail table. Resting perfectly in the center of that table, illuminated by the dim emergency wall sconces, was a crisp $100 bill and a $50 bill sitting there. I was nowhere to be found. The entire ballroom stared at the empty, dark corner. The silence stretched for a few agonizing seconds before the whispers erupted once again, louder and more frantic than before. Brittany continued to stand on the stage, gripping the microphone, her chest heaving as she desperately searched the shadows for any sign of me. She looked like a trapped animal, completely unable to process the reality of her own destruction. She continued to ramble into the microphone, spewing incoherent accusations about my supposed jealousy and financial instability. But nobody was listening to her anymore. The physical evidence of my absence, paired with the crisp cash left behind, completely shattered her pathetic narrative. While Richard yelled at the security guards, and Cynthia wept openly onto a ruined silk tablecloth, Isaiah Dubois made his move. Isaiah was a 31-year-old man, raised in a family that valued integrity, education, and absolute accountability above all else. His grandfather had been a highly respected judge in Atlanta, and his mother was a formidable woman who tolerated zero deception. He had fallen in love with Brittany because she had presented herself as a sweet, grounded woman who shared his deep family values. He had believed her when she claimed her family was traditional and hardworking. Now standing in the middle of a dimly lit ballroom surrounded by panic and federal fraud allegations, he realized he had married a complete stranger. He did not scream. He did not yell at my parents. He simply let go of his mother's hand and began walking deliberately toward the stage. The chaotic crowd instinctively parted for the groom, his tall frame cutting through the panic with quiet, commanding authority. He walked up the short wooden steps and approached Gregory, the general manager, who was currently blocking my father from advancing any further. Isaiah placed a firm hand on Richard's shoulder, physically stopping my father from stepping closer to the venue staff. Richard looked up at his new son-in-law, expecting backup, but Isaiah did not even look at him. Isaiah kept his dark eyes locked entirely on Gregory. His voice was incredibly calm and steady, perfectly cutting through the hysterical background noise of his new bride. "Excuse me, Gregory," Isaiah said politely, extending his right hand. "I am the groom, and I need to see the official documentation you are holding right now." Gregory hesitated for only a fraction of a second before recognizing the absolute authority in Isaiah's tone. The general manager handed over the heavy leather authorization folio. Isaiah opened the folder and looked down at the crisp bank documents. He possesses a highly analytical mind, and it took him less than 10 seconds to completely process the devastating truth printed in black and white. He saw the black tier American Express logo. He saw the massive $250,000 credit limit. He saw the itemized list of exorbitant charges, including the custom lace gown currently draped over Brittany's shaking body. Then his eyes locked onto the primary cardholder information printed in bold capital letters at the very top of the page. Audrey. It was the exact same name of the woman he had been told was a broke, unemployed burden to her family. The same woman his mother had just found sitting on a cheap plastic folding chair next to the kitchen. He saw the bright red federal fraud alert stamped across the pending transactions, citing identity theft and forged signatures. Isaiah stood perfectly still on the stage, holding the undeniable proof of his wife's massive deception. The puzzle pieces rapidly fell into place, forming a horrifying picture of the family he had just legally bound himself to. He remembered all the times Brittany had specifically asked him to pay for their shared expenses, claiming her money was entirely tied up in wedding deposits. He remembered my mother Cynthia constantly complaining about how much financial strain I supposedly put on them. It was all a meticulously crafted illusion designed to trap him and his wealthy family. They had stolen my identity, maxed out an elite credit line, and then forced me to sit by the trash cans while they drank premium champagne on my dime. The sheer audacity and criminal malice required to execute such a plan completely disgusted him. He slowly closed the leather folio and handed it back to Gregory with a curt professional nod of understanding. Isaiah did not look angry. He looked completely detached, as if a heavy fog had just lifted from his eyes, revealing a very ugly landscape. He slowly turned around and walked across the stage to face his hysterical bride under the emergency lights. The time for screaming and playing family games was finally over. It was now time for absolute, undeniable accountability. Isaiah descended the short wooden steps of the stage with a slow, deliberate cadence. Every single step echoed loudly in the painfully silent ballroom. The panicked guests intuitively stepped back, creating a wide, clear path for him. He walked directly toward the center of the dance floor where Brittany stood shivering in her incredibly expensive stolen dress. My parents, Richard and Cynthia, instinctively moved closer to their golden child, attempting to form a protective barrier around her. But Isaiah did not stop or slow down. He walked right up to the edge of their defensive circle, his dark eyes completely devoid of the warmth and love he had shown her just an hour ago at the altar. Brittany tried to reach out and grab his hands, her face heavily streaked with mascara tears. Isaiah stepped back immediately, refusing to let her touch him. His physical rejection caused a collective gasp to ripple through the nearest tables. "What is going on, Isaiah?" she sobbed dramatically, pressing her hands to her chest, playing the role of the terrified victim. "Tell them to turn the music back on and fix this." Isaiah stared down at her, his posture perfectly rigid. "I just read the master authorization folio from the general manager," Isaiah said, his voice dangerously low and completely stripped of any emotion. "It is a very interesting document, Brittany. It raises some incredibly serious questions about the woman I just married." My father tried to intervene, puffing out his chest. "Listen here, son," Richard started, but Isaiah instantly silenced him with a single sharp glare. "You are going to explain this to me right now, Brittany," Isaiah commanded, ignoring my father entirely. "You told me your older sister Audrey was a chronically unemployed burden who constantly drained your parents' finances. You told me she was so jealous of your success that she could barely function in polite society. Yet the black tier credit card that paid for every single flower, every drop of champagne, and the very dress you are wearing right now is legally registered exclusively in her name. So tell me, Brittany, why is your unemployed estranged sister's name on a fraudulent credit account paying for our wedding?" Brittany physically flinched as if he had struck her. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no actual words came out. She looked wildly at our mother for help, but Cynthia was staring at the floor, completely paralyzed by the public humiliation. "I do not know what you are talking about." Brittany finally stammered, her voice weak and trembling. "She must have stolen my identity." "Yes, that is it. She stole my information and opened it to frame me because she hates me." It was the most pathetic, illogical lie she had ever constructed. Isaiah shook his head in absolute disgust. "The venue manager just confirmed she executed a hard freeze with the Federal Fraud Division," Isaiah stated flatly. "You do not freeze a fraudulent card if you are the one secretly using it to pay for someone else's wedding." Before Brittany could attempt to fabricate another desperate lie, a powerful presence materialized right beside Isaiah. Mrs. Dubois stepped into the center of the confrontation. She did not look angry or hysterical. She looked entirely composed, which made her absolute disdain even more terrifying. She looked Brittany up and down, taking in the lavish gown and the sparkling jewelry. "We welcomed you into our home," Mrs. Dubois said, her voice smooth but laced with pure ice. "We introduced you to our friends and our extended family. We believed you shared our core values of honesty and integrity. But you are nothing more than a common thief dressed up in stolen silk. You looked me in the eye and lied to me about your own sister while spending her money. My mother finally found her voice, stepping forward to defend her precious daughter. Please, Mrs. Dubois. Cynthia pleaded, her voice cracking with desperation. Do not be so incredibly harsh. We can explain everything if you just give us a moment. It is simply a complicated family financial matter. Mrs. Dubois slowly turned her piercing gaze onto my mother. There is absolutely nothing complicated about felony identity theft, Cynthia, she replied sharply. You sat next to me all evening boasting about your vast wealth while your eldest daughter was intentionally shoved by the kitchen doors to hide your crimes. Your entire family is a pathetic, toxic sham. I will absolutely not allow my son to be legally tied to a family of unrepentant criminals. The brutal honesty of her words echoed loudly across the dark, silent ballroom, leaving my family entirely exposed to the harsh judgment of high society. Brittany realized that her world was collapsing around her. She turned toward the exit. She did not walk. She ran. Brittany hiked up the heavy layers of her $15,000 custom lace gown and sprinted directly toward the heavy wooden side doors of the grand ballroom. She shoved past a startled waiter and burst out into the cool Rhode Island night. The heavy doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off the suffocating silence of the ruined reception. Panic had entirely taken over her nervous system. She was no longer the elegant high society bride she had pretended to be all evening. She was a desperate fugitive trying to outrun the devastating consequences of her own actions. Right behind her, my parents abandoned any remaining shred of their precious social dignity. Richard and Cynthia pushed their way through the crowd of whispering guests, ignoring the judgmental stares. They chased after their golden child, their dress shoes slapping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. Richard shouted Brittany's name, his voice cracking with panic and physical exertion. Cynthia was weeping hysterically, clutching her ruined silk dress as she stumbled through the exit doors. Their carefully constructed image was ruined forever. Outside the sprawling Newport mansion, the manicured gravel paths were illuminated by soft amber landscape lighting. Brittany did not care about the pristine aesthetic anymore. She sprinted across the sharp gravel, dragging the long cathedral veil and the delicate lace train of her dress directly through the dirt. The white fabric snagged on jagged stones and ripped loudly, tearing the material to shreds. Mud instantly stained the bottom of the dress, turning it into a filthy mess. She did not stop to gather the fabric. She kept running, her chest heaving as she desperately scanned the massive parking lot. She was looking for my car. She knew I had not left the property yet, because she had not heard the distinct roar of a sports car engine pulling out onto the main road. She frantically darted between rented sedans and SUVs, her eyes searching. Richard and Cynthia finally caught up to her in the middle of the lot, gasping for air. My father clutched his chest, his face pale and sweating profusely in his tight tuxedo. My mother reached out to grab Brittany's arm, but Brittany violently yanked away. Where is she hiding? Brittany screamed, her voice echoing loudly across the quiet parking lot. Find her right now before she ruins my entire life and destroys everything I have built. They spread out, weaving recklessly between the parked vehicles. Then my father spotted it. Parked in the secluded back section of the lot, far away from the valet stand, was my charcoal gray Porsche Panamera. The sleek, aerodynamic lines of the car gleamed faintly under the distant glow of a single street lamp. The engine was not running, but the faint glow of the interior dashboard indicated the vehicle was still occupied. There she is! Richard yelled, pointing a trembling finger toward my car. Brittany whipped her head around and locked eyes on the Porsche. A fresh wave of hysterical energy surged through her body. She sprinted toward my car, kicking up clouds of white gravel dust with her designer heels. My parents followed closely behind her. They looked like a pack of desperate wild animals closing in on their prey, entirely consumed by their own selfish panic. Inside the luxurious cabin of my car, I sat still. The heavy soundproof doors and thick tinted glass completely isolated me from the chaotic world outside. The interior smelled of rich leather and the quiet certainty of my own success. I watched them sprinting toward me through the side mirrors. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or anxiety. I simply took another slow sip of my bottled water and watched the pathetic spectacle unfold. Brittany reached the driver's door first. She did not politely knock or ask me to roll down the window. She immediately slammed her open palms against the reinforced tinted glass. The heavy thud of her hands hitting the window vibrated softly through the solid frame of the car. "Audrey! Open this door right now!" she screamed, her face twisted in rage, her voice muffled and distorted by the thick acoustic glass. A second later, Richard and Cynthia arrived at the car. My father slammed his fists against the rear window, his face contorted in rage. My mother pounded hard on the front windshield, leaving greasy handprints across the pristine glass. They surrounded my vehicle, beating wildly against the windows and screaming demands at the top of their lungs. Their faces were flushed red and twisted with terror. From my calm, comfortable vantage point inside the quiet cabin, they looked exactly like trapped animals completely losing their minds inside a cage of their own making. I watched them thrash against the reinforced glass for a full minute. I let them exhaust their initial burst of hysterical energy. Their open palms slapped loudly against the tinted windows, leaving greasy streaks of sweat and panic across the sleek exterior of my car. Brittany was sobbing so hard her chest heaved violently under the stolen lace bodice of her ruined custom gown. Richard was red in the face, shouting demands that were completely muffled by the heavy acoustic insulation of my luxury vehicle. Cynthia had her face pressed so closely against the front windshield that her expensive makeup smeared against the glass, making her look entirely unhinged. They thought their aggressive physical presence would somehow intimidate me into submission, just like it always had when I was a child. They thought if they screamed loud enough and looked angry enough, I would instantly fold and hand over my financial independence to save them from public embarrassment. But I was not that scared little girl anymore. I was a senior forensic accountant who dealt with hostile, aggressive criminals on a regular basis. I calmly reached over to the driver's side door panel. I pressed my manicured finger against the smooth chrome button controlling the window. I did not lower it completely. I let the glass slide down exactly 4 inches, creating a narrow horizontal slit between the warm, secure cabin of my car and the cold, chaotic parking lot. The moment the seal was broken, the overwhelming noise of their panic flooded into my quiet sanctuary. The sharp chill of the Rhode Island night air rushed in, carrying the aggressive scent of my mother's heavy French perfume and my father's Scotch. "Audrey, what is wrong with you?" Cynthia screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysterical rage. She shoved her face near the 4-inch opening, her eyes wide and wild. "Call the bank right now. Call them and unfreeze that account this very second. You are completely ruining your sister's perfect day. You are a cold, heartless monster to do this to your own flesh and blood. Look at her, Audrey, look at what you have done to her." She pointed a trembling finger at Brittany, who was standing a few feet back, shivering in the cold night air and openly weeping into her hands. Cynthia did not care that Brittany had committed a massive federal crime. She did not care that her youngest daughter had stolen $250,000 under my name. In her twisted, narcissistic reality, the only crime committed tonight was my refusal to quietly pay the bill and accept my place by the kitchen trash cans. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or try to defend myself against her ridiculous accusations. I simply broke eye contact with my furious mother and looked down at my hands resting comfortably on the leather steering wheel. I slowly extended my fingers, inspecting my fresh manicure. The subtle pale pink polish caught the faint amber glow of the dashboard lights. The edges were perfectly filed and absolutely flawless. It was a stark contrast to the filthy, torn wedding dress dragging in the gravel outside. "Did you hear me?" Cynthia shrieked, slamming her hand against the roof of the car. "You are humiliating us in front of the Dubois family. Isaiah's mother is inside demanding answers, and the venue manager is threatening to call the local police." You need to fix this right now before our reputation is permanently destroyed in this town. You owe us this much after everything we have sacrificed to raise you." I gently rubbed my thumb across my perfectly polished index finger, feeling the smooth surface. The absolute audacity of her demands was genuinely fascinating from a psychological standpoint. She was aggressively demanding that I become an active accessory to felony identity theft to protect her country club reputation. She was ordering me to assume $250,000 in fraudulent debt so her golden child could continue playing pretend. Richard pushed his way past my mother, shoving his red face near the narrow opening of the window. He tried to lower his voice to sound commanding and authoritative, but the sheer panic underneath betrayed him completely. "Listen to your mother, Audrey," he barked, gripping the top edge of the glass with his thick fingers. "This little stunt of yours is over. You have made your point, and you ruined the dinner service. Now be a responsible adult and unlock that card. We will discuss the details of the finances on Monday, but right now you need to act like part of this family and protect your sister. Do it now." I looked at my father's red face and listened to his absurd command. He genuinely believed that a simple phone call could erase $250,000 in federal fraud. He thought this was a simple family disagreement that could be swept under the rug and dealt with privately on Monday morning. I let his words hang in the cold night air for a few seconds. Then I leaned slightly closer to the narrow opening of the tinted window, ensuring my voice carried perfectly over their chaotic breathing. "I cannot unlock the card, Richard," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "It is no longer a credit card. It is officially classified as digital evidence in an active federal investigation. You are asking me to tamper with evidence, which is a separate federal offense. I am absolutely not going to prison to protect a thief." Cynthia gasped, gripping the edge of the window frame. "A thief?" she cried out indignantly. "How dare you call your sister a thief? She just wanted a beautiful wedding to match the Dubois family. You have plenty of money, Audrey. You could easily pay for this. You did not have to ruin her wedding over a simple misunderstanding." I shifted my gaze to my mother, locking eyes with her. "I did not ruin the wedding, Mom," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. "Brittany committed a Class C felony. She violated Title 18 United States Code Section 1343 for wire fraud and Section 1028A for aggravated identity theft. She forged my digital signature, intercepted my mail, and bypassed bank security protocols using a burner phone. The FBI has her IP address, and the bank has high-definition security footage of her carrying out the fraud. I am just letting natural consequences do their job." The legal terminology hit them like a physical blow. The color began to drain from my father's face as his aggressive posture crumbled. He understood the severe weight of those specific federal statutes. The realization that this was not a simple family dispute, but a massive criminal liability, was finally penetrating his arrogant skull. He realized the money was gone. "Federal investigation." Richard whispered, his voice suddenly sounding very small and fragile. "Audrey, you cannot be serious. You did not actually call the federal authorities on your own sister. Tell me you are just bluffing to teach her a lesson." I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up my encrypted laptop. I held it up near the window so the glow of the screen illuminated my face. "I submitted the complete digital dossier to the Internet Crime Complaint Center 20 minutes ago," I explained calmly. "I provided the bank statements, the geographical tracking logs, and the forged application documents. Brittany is looking at a mandatory minimum sentence for the aggravated identity theft alone. She will likely face 3 to 5 years in a federal penitentiary, and she will be legally required to pay full restitution for the stolen money." Brittany let out a loud, agonizing wail, falling to her knees on the sharp gravel. Her ruined $15,000 custom lace dress pooled around her in the dirt like a deflated parachute. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the terrifying reality of her impending prison sentence crashed down upon her. She was no longer crying because her aesthetic wedding timeline was ruined. She was crying because her entire future was completely over. Cynthia looked down at her golden child writhing in the dirt, and then looked back up at me, her eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of hatred and absolute terror. "You planned this," Cynthia hissed, her voice violently trembling. "You knew about this massive loan for months, and you waited until tonight to publicly destroy her. You sat there on that cheap chair and watched us celebrate while you had a federal report ready. You are evil, Audrey." "I offered you a choice tonight, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly even. "I came here tonight waiting to see if you would treat me with a single ounce of basic human decency. If you had given me a real seat at a real table, I might have paid the massive debt and walked away quietly. But you put me in the dark corner by the greasy kitchen doors, and Richard told me to pay for my own dinner plate. You aggressively made your choice. Now you get to live with the natural consequences of it. Your golden child is a federal criminal, and you enabled her every step of the way. You have no one to blame but yourselves. I am officially done with this family forever." The silence that followed my declaration was absolute. For a long moment, the only sound in the parking lot was Brittany's dramatic sobbing as she knelt in the sharp gravel. But Richard refused to accept the reality of the situation. My father had spent his entire adult life controlling the narrative of our family through financial manipulation and sheer volume. He could not comprehend a scenario where his eldest daughter held all the power and refused to surrender it to him. He was preparing to use the exact same authoritarian tactic he had used to terrorize me throughout my entire childhood. He stepped in front of my mother, physically blocking her from the window. He leaned down, putting his face directly in front of the 4-inch opening of the tinted glass. When he spoke, his voice was no longer pleading or fragile. It was the deep, booming command of a patriarch who expected instant, unconditional obedience. "You listen to me right now, young lady," Richard barked, his voice laced with venom. "I am the head of this family, and I am telling you that this nonsense ends tonight. You are going to cancel that report immediately. You make a 6-figure salary, Audrey. You have a luxury apartment and a Porsche. You can easily afford to absorb this cost. It is just money. You are going to pay the venue manager, you are going to pay the credit card bill, and you are going to apologize to your sister for causing this massive scene. It is your ultimate duty to protect the family name." I stared at him, listening to his completely delusional demands. He was standing in a dark parking lot next to his criminal daughter, demanding that I pay $250,000 to save a reputation that had already been completely destroyed. He genuinely believed that his deep voice and angry glare could force me to submit. "You think this is just about the money, Richard?" I asked softly, my voice perfectly steady. "You think I am doing this simply because I do not want to pay the massive bill? This is about the lack of respect you have shown me my entire life. You allowed my sister to commit a felony, and you fully expected me to quietly clean up the mess just like I always did when we were kids. But I am not a child anymore, and you have absolutely no authority over my life or my finances." He slammed his fist against the roof of the car again. "I am your father," he roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "You owe me your absolute respect, and you owe this family your unyielding support. You will pay this debt, Audrey, because you have the money and we do not. It is that simple. Do not make me tell you again." I did not flinch at the sound of his fist hitting the metal. I simply looked at him with profound pity. His attempt to intimidate me was completely pathetic. He was a weak man trying to pretend he was strong by bullying the only person who could actually save him. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up my silver clutch. I opened the clasp and reached inside, my fingers brushing against the smooth paper currency I had placed there earlier. I pulled out the crisp $100 bill and the $50 bill that he had aggressively thrown at me back in the ballroom. I held the money up so he could see it clearly in the dim amber light of the parking lot. His eyes locked onto the cash, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He did not understand what I was doing. I slowly extended my hand toward the narrow opening of the window. I slid the 2 bills through the 4-inch crack, letting them flutter down into the cold night air. The wind caught the money, blowing the bills against his chest before they fell into the gravel right next to his polished dress shoes. "Here is my contribution, Richard," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "Family does not charge for dinner." The impact of those words hit him harder than any physical blow ever could. He stared down at the money resting in the dirt, his entire body going completely slack. The booming patriarch was instantly gone, replaced by a broken, defeated old man who finally realized he had lost everything. He had no power, no money, and no control. He slowly looked up from the gravel, his eyes hollow and empty. He opened his mouth to speak, but absolutely nothing came out. The definitive reality of his total defeat had finally broken him. Richard remained perfectly still, staring blankly at the crumpled bills resting in the dirt. The fight had entirely drained from his body. He stepped back from the window, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. But Brittany was not ready to surrender. Seeing our father physically back down sent her over the edge. She scrambled up from the gravel, her ruined $15,000 lace dress clinging to her legs like dirty rags. Her face was a horrific mask of smeared mascara and raw, unhinged fury. She lunged forward, pushing our defeated father out of the way, and slammed her hands against the tinted glass of my car door. "You think you have won?" Brittany shrieked, her voice completely devoid of any human rationality. "You think you can just drive away in your expensive sports car and leave me here with nothing? You owe me this wedding, Audrey. You owe me that money. You have always had everything handed to you just because you are smart. You sit in your fancy Manhattan office making millions of dollars while I have to scrape by. It is not fair. You do not even know how to be wealthy. You wore a boring blue dress to my luxury event. You do not deserve that credit card." "I do." I rolled the window down another inch just to ensure every single word of her confession was perfectly audible. "I did not steal anything." Brittany continued, her twisted logic spilling out into the cold night air. "I just took what should have rightfully been mine. I am the pretty one. I am the one who belongs in high society. I am the one who married into the Dubois family. You are just a boring accountant. You should have been honored to pay for my perfect day. You should have been grateful that I even allowed you to be in the same room as my new husband." As she continued screaming her vile, entitled delusions into the narrow crack of my window, she was entirely unaware of the two figures emerging from the amber shadows of the parking lot. Isaiah and his mother had quietly walked out of the grand ballroom, searching for the source of the commotion. They approached my charcoal gray Porsche with silent, deliberate footsteps. The crunching of the gravel beneath their shoes was completely masked by Brittany's hysterical yelling. They stopped just 10 feet away, standing directly behind my oblivious mother and sister. They stood perfectly still, listening to the undeniable truth pouring directly from the bride's own mouth. I took a deep breath, watching Isaiah's face through my side mirror. His expression was a portrait of pure, absolute horror. He was listening to the woman he had just vowed to love and cherish loudly, confessing to felony wire fraud and identity theft. Even worse, he was listening to her justify the federal crime with the most shallow, narcissistic reasoning imaginable. She was not crying because she was sorry. She was screaming because she genuinely believed her physical appearance entitled her to steal $250,000 from her own sister. Mrs. Dubois stood beside her son, her jaw tightly clenched, her eyes burning with a cold, righteous fury. Brittany paused her rant to gasp for air, her chest heaving violently. She raised her fist, preparing to smash it against my window again. Before her knuckles could even touch the glass, a deep, resonant voice cut through the cold Rhode Island night air. "You really believe you are entitled to steal from your own family just because you think you are pretty?" Isaiah asked, his voice dangerously low and thick with absolute disgust. The sound of his voice hit Brittany like a physical electric shock. She froze completely, her fist hovering inches from the tinted window. Slowly, agonizingly, Brittany turned around to face the darkness behind her. When she saw Isaiah and Mrs. Dubois standing there, the last remaining drop of color completely vanished from her face. She looked like a ghost draped in muddy rags. My mother Cynthia let out a sharp, terrified gasp, covering her mouth with both hands, as she realized the Dubois family had just witnessed the entire unhinged confession. Richard simply closed his eyes, unable to witness the final destruction of his social climbing dreams. The carefully constructed illusion was not just broken, it was entirely pulverized into dust. Isaiah shook his head slowly, stepping backward. He looked at her with deep, unmistakable contempt. "I thought I married a kind, honest woman tonight," Isaiah said clearly. "But you are nothing more than a selfish, cruel child. I have heard absolutely enough. Your horrible secret is completely out. My family is officially leaving right now. Do not try to follow us and do not call me ever." Isaiah did not wait for Brittany to formulate another pathetic excuse. He reached up and unbuttoned his custom-tailored tuxedo jacket. The crisp black fabric, which had been charged directly to my stolen credit line, slipped easily off his broad shoulders. He folded it neatly and handed it over to his mother. Mrs. Dubois accepted the garment with a dignified nod, her eyes never leaving my sister's devastated face. The symbolic weight of that simple gesture was monumental. Isaiah was literally shedding the fraudulent skin my family had dressed him in. He stood there in his crisp white dress shirt, his posture radiating absolute finality. Brittany fell forward, reaching out to grab his sleeve, but Isaiah took a sharp step backward. "Do not touch me," he warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. "We are done." He looked down at her trembling left hand, where a massive 2-carat diamond engagement ring sparkled under the amber parking lot lights. Isaiah had purchased that ring with his own hard-earned money months before this entire fraudulent nightmare began. It was the only authentic piece of their entire relationship. "Keep the ring," Isaiah said, his tone dripping with pure icy disdain. "You are going to need it to pay your defense attorney." Brittany let out a guttural scream of pure agony, dropping to her knees in the sharp gravel. "Please, Isaiah," she begged, her voice shredding with desperation. "You cannot leave me here. I am your wife. We just took our vows." Isaiah looked down at her with absolutely zero pity. "A marriage built on a foundation of massive federal fraud is not a marriage, Brittany. It is an active crime scene. I will have my lawyers file the annulment papers first thing Monday morning. You will never see me again." He turned his back on her completely. Mrs. Dubois followed her son, her elegant emerald green gown, brushing past my mother without a single word of parting. Cynthia reached out weakly, as if to grab Mrs. Dubois' arm, but thought better of it, letting her hand drop uselessly to her side. Richard remained frozen, a hollow shell of a man, watching his ticket to high society walk away forever. From the warm, secure cabin of my Porsche, I watched the Dubois family execute a flawless, coordinated exit. Isaiah pulled out his phone and made a single brief call. Within 60 seconds, a fleet of 3 polished black SUVs pulled around the side of the Newport mansion. The drivers emerged, opening the heavy doors for the Dubois family members, who had quickly gathered their belongings from the ruined reception. The affluent guests from Atlanta piled into the luxury vehicles, their faces grim but incredibly resolute. They were a family that handled crises with swift, decisive action, leaving the toxic wreckage behind, without a single backward glance. Isaiah opened the door of the lead SUV. Before stepping inside, he turned and looked directly toward my car. He could not see my face through the dark-tinted glass, but he knew I was watching. He gave a slow, firm nod of silent acknowledgement. It was not a gesture of friendship, but rather a quiet recognition between two rational adults who had both been victimized by the exact same parasitic family. I nodded back even though he could not see me. He climbed into the back seat, and the heavy car door slammed shut with a definitive thud. The engines of the black SUVs roared to life in unison. Their bright headlights swept across the gravel, illuminating Brittany's ruined form one last time before the convoy accelerated toward the main gates of the estate. The red taillights faded into the cool Rhode Island night, completely severing my family from the wealth and status they had so desperately tried to steal. The wedding was officially dead. The grand illusion was completely shattered, leaving nothing but the cold, hard reality of federal consequences. I watched my sister sobbing in the dirt, her dream of an elite lifestyle disappearing down the dark highway. She had gambled everything on her ability to manipulate the truth and bully me into absolute submission. She had lost spectacularly. My parents stood beside her, offering no comfort because they were entirely consumed by their own impending ruin. They had enabled her toxic behavior for decades, shielding her from accountability while punishing me for simply existing. Tonight, the bill for all those years of emotional abuse had finally come due, and the cost was completely astronomical. I took a final deep breath of the crisp, cold air filtering directly into my car and pressed the chrome button on my door panel. The thick acoustic glass rolled up smoothly, sealing the cabin and permanently cutting off the terrible sound of my ruined family forever. The thick acoustic glass rolled up smoothly, sealing the cabin and permanently cutting off the terrible sound of my ruined family forever. The silence inside my vehicle was profound. It was the true sound of complete, absolute liberation. I reached forward and pressed the engine ignition button. The powerful engine roared to life with a deep, steady hum that vibrated gently through the leather steering wheel. The digital dashboard illuminated, casting a soft, warm glow over my face. It was completely over. The grand charade was dead, and I was finally completely free. Before I could shift the gear selector into drive, a new sound pierced the quiet Rhode Island night. It was faint at first, but rapidly grew much louder. A high-pitched wail echoed over the manicured grounds of the massive estate. I glanced at my side mirror and saw the reflection of flashing red and blue strobe lights bouncing off the dark tree line bordering the property. Local law enforcement was rapidly arriving. I knew exactly who had called them. Gregory, the general manager, was not the kind of man to let a $250,000 theft of services go completely unanswered. He had hosted a massive high-end event, provided premium food, and poured top-shelf liquor for 300 very wealthy guests. When the payment completely evaporated, he did exactly what any responsible business manager would always do. He dialed 911. Two white and blue police cruisers swung aggressively into the main entrance of the sprawling parking lot. Their tires crunched loudly over the gravel as they bypassed the valet stand and headed directly toward the grand ballroom exit. I kept my foot firmly pressed on the brake pedal, watching the scene unfold entirely through my rearview mirror. The cruisers came to a halt, parking at a sharp angle that physically blocked the main gravel path leading back to the highway. 4 uniformed officers stepped out of the vehicles. They looked highly alert, their hands resting casually near their heavy utility belts. Gregory walked out of the heavy side doors of the venue to meet them, holding the leather authorization folio firmly in his hand. He pointed directly across the lot, toward the chaotic cluster of my toxic family members. I watched through the mirror as the officers began walking briskly toward my younger sister. Brittany was still kneeling in the sharp dirt, completely oblivious to her surroundings. Her ruined custom lace gown looked like a tragic theatrical costume under the harsh, flashing strobe lights of the police cruisers. Richard and Cynthia finally noticed the approaching authorities. My father puffed out his chest and stepped forward, attempting to intercept the officers. I could clearly see his mouth moving frantically. He was undoubtedly trying to use his booming patriarch voice to explain away the situation as a simple misunderstanding. He probably promised them he could write a check or call his lawyer on Monday morning. But local law enforcement officers responding to a massive commercial fraud call do not care about a man's country club membership or his arrogant, commanding tone. The lead officer held up a single hand, signaling my father to stop talking and step backward immediately. The absolute dismissal of his authority was beautifully poetical. The officer then looked down at Brittany. He pulled a small notepad from his uniform pocket and began asking her direct investigative questions. Even from a distance, I could see the exact moment the sheer terror finally paralyzed her completely. She stopped crying. She stopped screaming about how incredibly unfair the world was. She looked up at the silver badge gleaming on the officer's chest and realized that her actions had real terrifying consequences that she could not manipulate her way out of. Cynthia began weeping again, clutching Richard's arm for physical support. My mother looked entirely broken and hopelessly defeated. The high society elite she had desperately tried to impress were long gone, safely driving back to Atlanta. In their place stood armed police officers questioning her daughter under the cold glare of emergency lights. The luxurious fairy tale she had bragged about online had officially morphed into a humiliating criminal nightmare. They were entirely trapped in the wreckage they had built with their own greedy hands. I had seen absolutely everything I needed to see tonight. The scales of justice had been perfectly balanced. I moved my right hand to the center console and shifted the heavy transmission into drive. I slowly eased my foot off the brake, letting the sleek charcoal gray car roll forward over the gravel. I navigated smoothly around the parked cruisers, keeping my headlights dim. I steered down the long driveway and merged seamlessly onto the highway. I drove back to my successful New York life forever. 3 months passed since that spectacular collapse at the Newport mansion. The crisp autumn air of Rhode Island had given way to the brutal, unforgiving winter. During those 90 days, the natural consequences of my family's actions unfolded with terrifying precision. I did not have to lift another finger or seek any further revenge. The federal justice system and the unforgiving nature of high society did all the heavy lifting for me. To keep Brittany out of a federal penitentiary, Richard and Cynthia had to make impossible, devastating choices. The federal prosecutor assigned to the case was entirely merciless. Because I had provided an absolutely airtight digital dossier, the FBI had everything they needed to secure a swift conviction for aggravated identity theft and wire fraud. Brittany was staring down a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal prison. The only way her high-priced defense attorney could negotiate a plea deal for felony probation and extensive community service was if she paid full and immediate financial restitution to the credit card issuer and the Newport venue management. My parents did exactly what they always did. They sacrificed their entire existence to shield their golden child from the harsh reality of her own actions. But this time, the price tag was absolute total ruin. Richard and Cynthia had to completely liquidate their hard-earned retirement portfolios. Every single penny they had saved for the last 35 years vanished overnight. They used the funds to cover the $250,000 stolen credit line and to pay the exorbitant legal retainers required to keep Brittany out of a jail cell. But even draining their entire life savings was not enough to satisfy the aggressive civil lawsuits filed by the catering company and the floral vendors. To cover the remaining debts, my parents were forced to put their beloved suburban home on the market. The sprawling, beautiful house with the perfectly manicured lawn was sold in a desperate fire sale for significantly below market value. They packed up decades of memories into cheap cardboard boxes and moved into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a much less desirable neighborhood. Their precious social status evaporated instantly. High society is incredibly unforgiving when it comes to public scandals involving blatant federal fraud. The prestigious local tennis club permanently revoked my mother's membership, citing a sudden violation of their moral conduct clause. My father's wealthy golf buddies entirely stopped returning his phone calls. The Dubois family possessed an incredibly powerful social influence, and the shocking story of the fraudulent wedding spread through their elite circles like a devastating wildfire. My parents became absolute pariahs in their own affluent community. Former friends literally crossed the street at the grocery store just to avoid making awkward eye contact with Cynthia. They were completely shunned by the very people they had bankrupted themselves to impress. Brittany was forced to move into the tiny second bedroom of our parents' new apartment. Her lifelong dream of becoming a wealthy elite socialite was entirely dead. As a convicted felon on active probation, her shallow career as a social media consultant was permanently destroyed. No reputable brand or corporate client would ever hire someone with a documented federal fraud record. She spent her days working a grueling minimum wage retail job just to pay her court-mandated probation fees and legal penalties. The $15,000 custom lace wedding dress now permanently stained with dark mud and ripped aggressively at the seams, hung in a cheap plastic garment bag in the back of her tiny closet. It served as a haunting daily reminder of the single night she gambled absolutely everything and lost spectacularly. The toxic family dynamic that had sustained them for decades finally collapsed under the crushing, suffocating weight of poverty and mutual resentment. Richard constantly blamed Cynthia for indulging Brittany's worst impulses. Cynthia fiercely blamed Richard for failing to manage the financial crisis and losing their beautiful home. Brittany aggressively blamed both of them for not having enough actual wealth to fund her luxury lifestyle in the first place. They were permanently trapped together in a miserable tiny apartment, completely consumed by their own bitter anger. They had willingly traded their financial security, their beautiful home, and their carefully curated social dignity for a selfish daughter who did not even respect them. I observed all of this destruction from a very safe distance. I did not feel guilty or sad about their spectacular downfall. They had intentionally built their entire lives on a fragile foundation of lies, manipulation, and cruelty. I simply removed the financial pillar holding it all up and allowed gravity to do its natural job. The fall of their house was absolute. It was a fitting end for people who chose greed over love. While they suffocated in the bitter confines of their new reality, I sat comfortably in my spacious corner office, overlooking the breathtaking skyline of Lower Manhattan. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the glass and steel towers surrounding my building, casting a warm golden glow across my pristine mahogany desk. A hot cup of artisanal coffee rested next to my encrypted laptop. There was no chaos here. There was no screaming, no manipulation, and absolutely no manufactured family drama. There was only the quiet hum of immense professional success and the deep, profound peace of a life meticulously built on truth and hard work. I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the rich flavor wash over my tongue. I felt a level of absolute tranquility that I had never experienced during my entire childhood. My personal cell phone sat face up on my desk. Its screen remained entirely dark and wonderfully silent. In the immediate aftermath of the ruined wedding, Richard and Cynthia had attempted a relentless campaign of digital harassment. They tried calling from blocked numbers, leaving unhinged voicemails demanding I pay for their ruined lives. They sent venomous messages, accusing me of destroying the family. But I am a senior forensic accountant, and I understand exactly how to sever a connection permanently. I did not just block their phone numbers and social media profiles. I hired a ruthless corporate attorney to issue legally binding cease and desist orders to every single member of my immediate family. The legal documents clearly outlined the severe consequences of any further harassment. The threat of additional police involvement was the only language they actually respected. The digital and legal walls I built around my life were completely impenetrable. They could no longer reach me to drain my energy or demand my money. The silence they left behind was not empty or lonely. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Without the constant, exhausting weight of their toxic expectations dragging me down, my career skyrocketed to entirely new heights. The mental bandwidth I used to waste agonizing over Brittany's manufactured crises or my mother's cruel comments was now completely redirected into my forensic investigations. Just last week, I successfully uncovered a complex multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme for a massive international client, earning me a substantial performance bonus and a fast-track promotion to junior partner at the firm. My colleagues respected my sharp intellect and my unyielding dedication to uncovering the truth. I was surrounded by highly educated, driven professionals who valued my actual contributions rather than judging me for my refusal to wear expensive designer labels. I was thriving in an environment based entirely on merit and integrity. It was the exact opposite of the hollow, fraudulent world my family had desperately tried to force me into. Society constantly pushes the toxic narrative that blood is thicker than water. People are heavily conditioned to believe that you must unconditionally forgive your family members simply because you share the same genetic material. We are told to keep the peace and turn the other cheek when our relatives abuse us, manipulate us, or steal from us. But sitting in my high-rise office, looking out over the sprawling, endless possibilities of New York City, I realized just how incredibly dangerous that philosophy truly is. You do not negotiate with parasites. You do not invite a malignant tumor to stay inside your body just because it has been there for a long time. You excise it completely to save your own life. Cutting my parents and my sister out of my life was not an act of cruelty or petty revenge. It was an act of profound self-preservation. It was the ultimate declaration of my own self-worth. I finally recognized that I deserved to be surrounded by people who celebrated my existence instead of merely tolerating my presence when they needed a financial bailout. I turned my chair slightly to face the massive floor-to-ceiling window. Far below me, the busy streets of Manhattan were alive with millions of people rushing to their jobs, completely unaware of the massive family empire I had quietly dismantled 3 months ago. I did not feel a single ounce of regret for walking out of that dimly lit ballroom and driving away. I had successfully protected my identity, my hard-earned assets, and my mental health. I opened a new highly encrypted master file on my laptop, ready to dive into my next corporate investigation. A genuine smile spread across my face. My name is Audrey, and I am a senior forensic accountant. I hunt frauds for a living, and I started by completely destroying the biggest frauds I ever knew. The intercom on my desk chimed softly, pulling me out of my thoughts. My executive assistant Sarah spoke clearly through the small speaker. Audrey, your 10 o'clock appointment is here. The representatives from the new corporate acquisition account just arrived, and they are ready for you. I closed the encrypted file on my laptop and shifted fully into my professional persona. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored blazer, stood up from my leather chair, and told Sarah to send them in immediately. I fully expected to see a team of older, white-haired Wall Street executives walking into my office to discuss a standard merger. The heavy frosted glass door of my office swung open. I maintained my practiced professional smile, ready to greet the new clients. But the breath caught slightly in my throat. Walking through the doorway was not a team of strangers in gray suits. It was Mrs. Dubois, wearing a stunning tailored navy blue blazer, and Isaiah dressed in a sharp charcoal suit. They looked exactly as elegant and commanding as they had on the night of the ruined wedding. I remained standing behind my mahogany desk, my expression instantly freezing into a mask of polite neutrality. For a fraction of a second, I wondered if this was a bizarre attempt at closure or some lingering legal complication from Brittany's spectacular mess. But their body language told a completely different story. There was absolutely no hostility or awkwardness in their posture. Isaiah closed the glass door behind him and offered a genuine, respectful smile. "Good morning, Audrey," Isaiah said, his voice carrying the exact same calm authority I remembered from the parking lot. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with us on such short notice." I gestured to the 2 comfortable leather guest chairs positioned in front of my desk. "Good morning, Isaiah, and good morning, Mrs. Dubois," I replied smoothly. "Please have a seat." They sat down, and Mrs. Dubois placed a thick leather briefcase on the edge of my desk. She folded her hands, resting them on top of the briefcase, and looked at me with deep, assessing eyes. "I imagine you are quite surprised to see us here, Audrey." Mrs. Dubois began, her tone entirely professional and razor-sharp. "Let me assure you immediately that we are not here to discuss your parents or your sister. That entire unfortunate chapter is completely closed and legally handled. We are here strictly on corporate business." I sat back in my chair, my curiosity genuinely piqued. "I am listening," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly even. Isaiah leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "Our family operates Dubois Medical Holdings," Isaiah explained. "We manage a vast network of private surgical centers and medical suppliers across the Southeast. We are currently in the final stages of a massive $90 million acquisition of a rival medical distributor. However, my mother and I have developed some serious reservations about their internal ledger." Mrs. Dubois tapped the leather briefcase with her manicured finger. We strongly suspect they are hiding massive off-the-books liabilities and artificially inflating their margins to secure a much higher buyout price. We need a ruthless forensic auditor to go in and tear their financial statements apart. After the incident at the Newport mansion, I was incredibly curious about the woman who managed to single-handedly freeze a black-tier credit account and execute a flawless federal takedown in under an hour. So I made some calls to my private contacts in the financial sector. I pulled your professional background, Audrey. I read all about the offshore embezzlement rings you dismantled and the corporate fraud syndicates you successfully prosecuted. Your reputation here in Manhattan is absolutely terrifying and entirely brilliant. I looked at her, feeling a profound wave of validation wash over me. She did not see me as the socially awkward sister who was forced to sit by the kitchen doors. She saw me for exactly who I was. She saw the apex predator of the financial world. We need a shark. Isaiah added, his dark eyes locked firmly onto mine. We need someone who is completely immune to emotional manipulation. Someone who will look at the cold, hard data and ruthlessly expose any hidden deceit, regardless of who gets hurt in the process. We realized the absolute best person for this job was the brilliant woman who did not even hesitate to dismantle her own toxic family to uphold the truth. He unclasped the leather briefcase and slid a thick stack of preliminary financial documents across my mahogany desk. I looked down at the pristine documents. The complex numbers and corporate ledgers printed on the pages practically called out to me. This was my absolute domain. This was exactly where I belonged. I reached out and pulled the heavy file closer, flipping open the cover page with practiced efficiency. I charge a premium hourly rate for corporate acquisitions. I said, my voice projecting absolute, unyielding confidence. And I require total unrestricted access to their digital servers and bank records. If there is a single forged document or a hidden liability in this merger, I will find it, and I will completely destroy their valuation. Mrs. Dubois smiled. It was a fierce, predatory smile of absolute mutual respect. We would expect nothing less from you, Audrey, she said. She stood up from the leather guest chair and extended her hand across the desk. I stood up tall and met her grasp. Our handshake was incredibly firm and anchored in pure professional recognition. Isaiah stood and shook my hand next his grip, strong and highly appreciative. There were no fake pleasantries or toxic family obligations lingering in the air. There was only the pure, unadulterated triumph of competence, truth, and hard work. I watched them walk out of my office, knowing I had finally won everything.